Hey everybody, hello and welcome. I hope everybody's doing very well. This here is by far my most requested video whenever I talk about my YouTube channel or like when I talk about plants. My friends are always like, hey, can you make a video on orchids? And I kind of cringe a little bit because I've had some pretty rough experiences with orchids in the past, but I think I've got a handle of it now. So I want to teach you guys a little bit of what I've personally learned from these guys. And I know this film setup's a little different. Finally, I have a stand, but I don't know how to set it up. I'm not very tech savvy if you guys haven't figured that out yet. So this is kind of a weird angle, but this is the best I can do for now. Yeah, so this here is a moth orchid or a Phalaenopsis orchid. It's probably the single most commercially reproduced species of orchid. So many different cultivars of different sizes. I have this one here growing in sphagnum moss. This was a gift from my mom's friend Esmeralda, so if you're watching this, thank you. Yeah, so I'm just gonna walk through a few do's and don'ts, I guess, from my trials and my errors, because it's been quite a journey. So first of all, orchids need a lot less water than people might think. The number one cause of death in Phalaenopsis orchids is overwatering, which leads to root rot. I learned that the hard way, and I'm currently learning that the hard way with an orchid. I'll show you in a sec. Orchids are epiphytes. Some of them are hemi-epiphytes, but the moth orchids are epiphytes, which means that they grow on top of other plant tissue, normally living tissue, such as arbor branches on large-scale trees. And they don't grow parasitically, they just kind of sit on top and anchor with aerial roots. So I want to show you that here. So this here is an aerial root. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of green. It has a really waxy cuticle to it. It's pretty fleshy. And this here is a dried up, not very pretty aerial root. So these here anchor into your growing media. Now with orchids, if you want the best success, you're going to want to have all sorts of aeration in the growing media. So for this reason, for moth orchids, I really recommend that you don't grow them in regular potting soil. It retains moisture too well and it's too dense, and then the roots can't breathe. So with the majority of orchids, but especially these Phalaenopsis orchids, you really want for their roots to breathe. And I just noticed this here has some watermarks from the store. So that's not a fungal issue, that's literally just watermarks. But yeah, one thing that I thought when I started growing orchids was that they will bloom pretty well year round and that they bloom in the summer. This is not what I found at all. In the northern hemisphere, their natural bloom season is about December, so expect blooms around Christmas, pretty reliably actually every year. And I want to show you guys this one. I'm actually really happy about this. This is my first time successfully getting this guy to rebloom. I don't know if you can see that. It's just beautiful. It's got new spikes too. They like blooming in cooler weather. If it's too hot, the blooms will shrivel off and they'll die a lot quicker. So you want to aim for a target temperature of a little bit over 10-15 degrees Celsius. You don't want to cook them because that's kind of the main asset for orchids, right, is the flowers. So if you want to keep them for longer, keep your room a little bit cooler. Speaking about coolness, I know a lot of people water their orchids with ice. I have killed every single moth orchid that I've ever owned with ice, that I've watered with ice. With the ice, I find that it burns the roots. The ice doesn't melt quickly enough, and then you get like frost burn on the top cuticle of the roots, and it's just not pretty. It wounds the plant, and it kind of allows for more pathogens to enter the plant. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You can do it in warmer climates, give it like a couple of ice cubes every now and then to saturate the moss or peat or whatever you're growing it in. But I don't personally recommend it because I find that the ice doesn't melt quickly enough. So those Just Add orchids, I just water them with tap water. If you're concerned about the quality of your tap water, definitely use distilled water. Orchids are sensitive to chemicals in the refining process of municipal water. So you might get a few yellow leaves here and now just because of the chlorine and other hard metals and such that might be in your municipal water. So just to be on the safe side, it's good to use distilled water. I personally find it behaves much like a calathea, where they're a little bit picky. Now this here is another orchid, and I just wanted to show you guys this one because this one's really cool. So it's producing these offshoots, which are called kaikis. Kaiki is literally the Hawaiian word for baby, I believe, but it's a Hawaiian origin word, and it's originating from the base here. With these guys here, the worst possible thing you can do is divide them and take them off when they're premature, because they need some good aerial roots, and that can take a year, honestly. If you want to encourage this, you can put a little bit of kaiki paste, which is a growth hormone stimulant, on either the tops of on the nodes of the tops of faded flower spikes, or you can just put it at the base of the plant and it'll encourage these guys. Now, another reason why I really like this orchid here is because it shows you kind of what happens with the older growth. So this over here is the older growth. It grows in a sequence upwards in a single direction. This whole structure here is called a fan. If you cut off the top, it's super detrimental to the orchid. Do not recommend that at all. Might shoot up from the base, but not recommended to cut off the top growth to prune it to make it shapely. They are positively phototropic, which means that they will grow towards the light, which can be really pretty if you want like a floppy cascading effect. Just something to keep in mind. But if you're repotting them and you're checking for root rot and such, this sort of lower section here is going to be 9 times out of 10 where all your problems are going to come from. So I recommend keeping at least a few aerial roots above soil line, just in case you lose your plant's root system, because then you have these ones to save you if you want to regrow your orchid, which I'll show you right here. And I don't know if you guys can hear my bird's actually in the background. He's probably pretty loud, so sorry about that. This here is my number one method for if all goes badly and you F up your orchid. Just a little tip is if you have roots, aerial roots, definitely save those. Highly recommend that you save some aerial roots because it'll save you a lot of time rehabbing your orchid. What I do, because they get wrinkled, and when they lose all of their leaves, obviously they can't absorb water. They'll dry up and become dehydrated and deteriorate rather quickly. So what I do is I put them upside down in some distilled water, because what this does is it maintains the hydration in the leaves so the leaves don't fail, and the plant will naturally produce this abscission layer. I don't know if you can see that there, my phone just doesn't want to focus. They'll produce this natural abscission layer here, and then it'll stop all the rot from coming through. I don't know if you can see, but there's a tiny little root coming out there. I've had success with this method. It's a last case scenario. Your orchid is about to die, you're throwing it in the trash. Put them upside down in some distilled water and you'll see they'll bounce back. That's actually how I saved the last orchid that I showed you. These ones are wonderful for if you have like a nicely lit bathroom because they benefit from the extra humidity. They're really, really good in kitchens. If you want to cross-pollinate them, you just put like a little Q-tip or like a little toothpick right here in the styla in the middle of the flower. You have to make sure that the flower is receptive, and you have to make sure that the flower is young and just opened, because that's when they're the most viable for reproduction that way. If you notice black spots on your leaves, that's almost always because there's extra moisture on the leaves and it hasn't had a chance to evaporate and it starts rotting. So if you notice that your orchid's blooms have faded but it still has a green stalk, cut it above a node, one of these guys here, and you'll notice that it'll 9 times out of 10, and that's a huge theme in this video because I think it's the 3rd time I've said that, it'll produce a new flower spike. That's what I'm going to do here. I don't know if you can see, but this here was the top of the flower spike. I cut it off. This was the last flower, and it started growing a little lateral shoot here. So if you want to prolong your bloom season, by all means do that. Every once in a while it'll surprise you and produce a little plantlet instead of a bloom stalk, which is really exciting because then you get more. And yeah, I will say most Phalaenopsis orchids are just inherently not fragrant. If you want a fragrant orchid, I highly recommend some Paphiopedilum orchids or Cattleya orchids or even some Dendrobium orchids. But these guys are more just for show because of the large size of their blooms, right? Yeah, so a few key takeaways. This is probably going to be a little bit of a longer video because it's kind of chaotic, and orchids and I have a really love-hate relationship. But you're going to want to keep them in bright light, as bright light as you possibly can. They can get a little etiolated. They can get a little bit scraggly. Your new growth will not be as big if they're in low light. By far, like, reaches well beyond by far the best thing you can do with your orchid is make sure that it has really good drainage and aeration around its roots. If you don't have good aeration around your roots, you can say goodbye to that orchid pretty quickly. You want to make sure that they're in a relatively high humidity environment. I'm talking 60-70% humidity is ideal. But after you're done watering, I do not recommend top watering unless you're doing like misting. I recommend putting one of these guys sort of in the bottom of your sink and waiting till it gets saturated and then draining out the remaining water, because they don't like to have their crown wet. So just in this little vent here, they don't like for that to be wet at all. I've killed 2 orchids that way. So just word to the wise, you don't want to keep water in there, especially not overnight. What else should I say? A lot of orchids are naturally pollinated by flies. Not this particular cultivar, but some Phalaenopsis orchids definitely are pollinated by flies. So it's just something to keep in mind that if you have flies in your house, this will make them happy and attract them, which is kind of annoying. And there are all those like little no-see-ums that you just want to swat with a fly swatter but can't find, those types of flies. Yeah. What else should I say? If you're really good with your orchid care, you can get them reblooming 2, 3, 4 times a year. I'll sacrifice a bloom stalk in the summer if it does emerge because the blooms are going to be a lot better for you in the following season in the winter if you don't let your orchid bloom in the summer, because then you're conserving all that energy growing new leaves. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, if you get new aerial roots, I'll just go like this, because this is the easiest one to show you. They're gonna emerge from here, kind of here, in between the leaves. So make sure that that area is free of any dead flower stalks and whatnot, because that's where you're going to get your new roots. That's the most regenerative juvenile tissue in the plant, and that's where you're going to save it, basically, if things go to CRAP. Yeah. If you notice that these guys are a little loose and the leaves are kind of snapping off, either A, it's a mature leaf and it's bound to fall off pretty soon, or B, that means you have heart rot or crown rot, which means that you're going to have to observe right on the very bottom where the roots kind of adjoin the stem. And most of the time that'll be black, unfortunately. But don't fear, you can still save an orchid using my method. And yeah. So I think the big lesson of this video is do not give up. If you are doing really badly with a particular plant and you want to see that plant in your collection and you have the economic means to afford that plant, don't give up on it. Try again. It's all a learning experience. I'm saying a lot in this video. Sorry about that, you guys. If you just change the culture that you grow your plants in every once in a while, or try a cultivar that's a little hardier, I'm sure you'll have lots of success with it and get to enjoy it. It's all a learning process, you know? Gardening, for the majority of us, is a hobby. It should be fun. You don't have to be good at your hobby, just as long as you're enjoying it and it makes your soul happy. So that's kind of, I guess, my life lesson of the day, is just as long as you're having fun, as long as you're trying new things. I did not think that I would have multiple blooming orchids in my care after killing so many, but here I am. And I've revived several of them, so I think I'm getting the hang of it. But it's a process, and it's never going to be perfect, but it's a process. Yeah, I have so many other videos I want to make, but I just have such like little time. I'm actually starting a new job this week, so I'm gonna be busy. It's gonna be okay though. I'm gonna make time for my friends. I'm gonna try to keep sane. Yeah, so stay blessed, you guys. This was probably the single most chaotic video I've ever made on this channel. Oh my gosh. But I hope you learned something. And yeah, stay blessed and have a beautiful day. Yeah.